Welcome to Tips Training and Certification online training program. Now we will study the fourth module under major phase of the max cycle in Six Sigma Green Belt training program. The module name is process mapping. What is exactly the process? A process converts input to output. A process is a stepwise or sequence-wise activities that uses inputs and produces the outputs in terms of product or services. Every process has its inputs and outputs. Each process is divided into sub-processes. That is, number of sub-activities, sub-operations under the specific process. Now, for identifying the inputs in each process, we have to consider the 8 M's. Which are those 8 M's? One is man, second material, third method, fourth machine, fifth is mother nature, means the environment required for the process. Next is your management, money, and finally the measurement system. What it means? The equipment or instruments required for the measuring the outputs or inputs required to fulfill the particular process. Outputs are usually the product or services. Outputs may be positive or negative. Producing the good item is positive output, whereas through that respective process, if there generates a negative output, that is the scrap, the waste, it is also a output we have to consider while designing this process, while drawing this process, because in the process mapping we have to also consider these negative outputs. There are primarily two tools which are used for identifying, drawing the process. These are, one is the process flow chart and second is the SIPOC diagram. That is supplier, input, process, output and customer diagram. See one by one. This is the typical schematic diagram of process flow chart. Here the inputs and the suppliers are given. Process is going through yellow rectangles, and finally the output which is buying by the customer. Now we will see the process mapping aspect using the process flow chart. What is the outcome of this process mapping? Process mapping helps us to identify the longer cycle time, the longer time which is required to produce the output, which may be in terms of negative aspect, that is waiting time, delays, etc. Second, it helps to identify the non-value added activities or steps. Which are non-value added activities and added activities we will see next in next slide. The bottlenecks of the process, the constraints of the process we will identify here, and based on that identified bottlenecks we will take the actions. Delaying the steps, improvement opportunities which will get identified through the process mapping. These are the typical symbols which are used for drawing the process flow chart. The rectangle which represents the activity. Example, delivery. Next symbol is your diamond symbol which represents the decision point. Similarly, there are other shapes which are used to represent particular activities or happenings. For example, the delay, which is the example of waiting. This is the typical process flow chart and the simpler flow chart example for the call registration to attending the customer. Now, while drawing the process flow chart, we have to consider the following things. Define the start and end of the process. Use a basic and standard set of symbols which we had discussed earlier in this sheet. Collect data from those doing the work. Means we have to collect this data not by sitting on the table but by collecting this data from where the activities are happening. We have to visit the site. Use a skilled facilitator. Document problems and capture the opportunities as you go. Means while visiting the site, you have to document, you have to note the problems which you are visualizing, which you are observing during the visit. Insert the attributes as you go: cost, quality, time, etc. Map the process as it is actually happening. Don't draw the flow chart as an ideal thing. You have to mention all the things which you are observing during your visit. Follow the process across the functions and departments. Follow the typical sequence, start point to end point, which will give you the positive aspect while drawing the process flow chart. Ask the questions to end users so that you will gather more information about the process. What you have to avoid during drawing or evaluating the process flow chart. Begin before you define the start and end. Work in vacuum. Don't assume the things. Make the process as you think it should happen. Here, while you are thinking that it should be like this, the process, don't write this process. You have to write the process as it is happening. Restrict the process to the activities of one department. Get held up in debate. Insist on perfection. At some point, the map is good enough. How to create a process flow chart? These are the steps which are standardized. You can follow your own way of drawing the process flow chart, but these are the guidelines provided to you. Now we will study one by one. First is determine the start point and stop point of the particular process. You can consider a sub-process as well. The stop point is normally the customer. The customer might be internal customer or the end user. Walk through the actual site. Go to the actual site. Observe the things. Write down the process steps as they are happening, as they are really in existence. Try to draw or note more specific observations, like you are seeing something is delayed because of IT deviations. Something is waiting because of non-availability of any resource. Please note it down. At a minimum, record the process steps, decision points, and transportation methods which are used during the process flow chart. For example, transportation method means carrying out the material, holding of material by using different tools. Once you have roughly mapped your process flow, make it more formal by adding the symbols. Once finished, sign and date the flow chart with your revision level. What can be included in process flow chart? These are the certain points. Transportation methods, transportation of the material, transportation of the machinery, start and stop points for each process and sub-process. Decision points. What are these decision points? These are the checkpoints for that particular characteristics. These are the critical points. If these are missed, your process get delayed or deviated. So you have to write all the decision points, critical points to the quality in your process flow chart. Inventory and storage points. How many operators at each process parameters for each step, that is cycle time, throughput time, scrap rate, turnaround rate, etc. Responsibilities of each step means what is expected from each step, what is the output expected from each step, what is the responsibility of that operator for that step, etc. Process analysis techniques. After drawing the process flow chart, you have to analyze this process. For this, there are techniques used. These are identification of value added activities and non-value added activities. Second is SIPOC diagram. Tips for process analysis. How to carry out the process analysis? For that, you have to follow these things. After creating the detailed process flow chart, now identify the process stepwise for value added activities and non-value added activities. Determine the cycle time and identify the bottlenecks for this process. Cycle time in terms of hours or seconds. Bottlenecks, these are the constraints of the process. Because of non-availability of resource, less availability of source, inventive problems, constraints of getting the material, these are the bottlenecks for the process, and you have to write it down these things and chalking out this as a identified aspect. Look for each error, inefficiency that contribute to defects, that is incompetency of the operator, deviations or ducks in the instruments, etc. Now, what is meant by value added activities? First, we have to check it. Value added activities are the activities which transforms the information into services or products. For these value added activities, customers are willing to pay for the things. Value added activities must meet three requirements. First is done right the first time. You have to carry out the activity right at the first time. Second is transformal, means one form of the thing get transferred to second form, or one item is moving from one place to other in terms of positive aspects. And third is your customer is ready to pay for the output. Non-value added activities. What are these? These activities are the activities which consumes resources, which form the wastage, which waste the resources, does not directly contribute to service or product. Customer does not care and willing to pay for this activity. For example, errors, mistakes, waitings, delays, these are all the non-value added activities. And what is our target in process mapping is to identify these points so that by analyzing the root cause we can take the actions on it. These are the certain example for value added activities and non-value added. Example for value added: entering the order, ordering the material, assembling, etc. Whereas non-value added activities are waiting, storing, tagging, counting, inspection, recording, testing, copying, filling, etc. Questions to identify value added and non-value added activities. Now sometimes what we have seen in earlier sheet, we can think about no, these are the value added activities, these are not value added activities. Now how we can identify these are the value added or non-value added activities? We have to ask these questions so that it will be easy for us to identify VA and NVA. Now ask the questions for each activity. Does the task add form, features or functions to the product or service? Does this task or activity enable a competitive advantage, that is reduced price, faster delivery, fewer defects, etc.? Would the customer be willing to pay for extra for this activity, prefer us over competition if he or she knew we were doing this task? If answer comes yes, it is a value added activity, else it is non-value added activity. Process analysis. It is once we have drawn the process flow chart, begin to identify the improvement areas. Why do we need to analyze the process? To identify inefficiencies, inefficient tasks in the process, to spot the possible effectiveness of improvements, to understand where value can be added. Questions to ask for process mapping and process analysis. Are the steps in the process arranged in logical sequence? If these processes and sub-processes are not logically sequenced, logically arranged, then this is the opportunity to redesign this process or that location so that the delays can be reduced. Second, do all the steps add values? Can some steps be eliminated and should others be added in order to improve the quality or operational performance? Can some activities be combined? For example, if there is drilling of a particular dia in each machine, that is machine number 1 and machine number 2, can we readjust first machine with 2 dia drilling machines? We can think of that things, no? Are capacities of each step in balance? That is, do bottlenecks exist in the process which will incur the excessive waiting time? What skills, equipments and tools are required at each step of the process? Should some steps be automated? Yes, we can think about these things. Where the critical points of the customer contact, you have to identify the critical points where you can improve the things. So you have to analyze these points. At which point in the process or in the system might errors occur that would result in customer dissatisfaction, and how might these errors be corrected? In the process there are very small errors which we are ignoring day by day, but we have to consider these small errors as well to remove it or eliminate so that it will add the value to the process. At which point or points should quality be measured? Where interaction with the customer occurs, what procedures, guidelines should employees follow to prevent the positive image? Here, the control plans, trainings can be organized for the sake of customer image. Based on this process analysis and the identified opportunities, value added activities, non value added activities, bottlenecks, errors, you have to take the action and redesign the process. Redesigning of the process flow, which include designing the process around the value added activities, work performance where it makes the most sense, ensure a continuous flow, there should not be a delay within the flow, reduce waiting, moving, rework or any motion, reduce the checks and reviews, build the quality in to reduce the inspection and rework. Use Pokayokis for building the non-foolproof activity. There is another tool used for advanced process mapping, that is the SIPOC. Now we will see this SIPOC diagram. SIPOC is a high level process map of a process to view how a company goes about satisfying a particular customer requirement in the overall supply chain. SIPOC stands for supplier, input, process, output and customer. Visual communicates the scope of the project. This SIPOC diagram, it is a visual representation of the actual happening of the process, which includes suppliers and customer. What is the application of the SIPOC diagram? A SIPOC diagram is usually applied during the data collection of the project at the define stage or at the measure phase, that is the beginning phase of the measure in the Six Sigma program. However, its impact is utilized throughout the project life cycle. Depending on the circumstances, depending on the situation in each project, you have to draw this SIPOC diagram. SIPOC diagrams helps a team and its sponsor agree on the project boundaries and scope. SIPOC helps in verifying input match outputs of upstream processes, output match inputs of downstream processes. SIPOC. Why and what? SIPOC diagram is a type of process map to identify the primary elements of the process. Which are the inputs? For each input, are there any suppliers available? Similarly, for each process, is there any output positive or negative? For each positive or negative, we have to identify the customers. It provides a macro view that brings together suppliers, input, process, output and customer. Sometimes SIPOC is pronounced as COPIS, COPIS. SIPOC documents the process name, process owner, start, stop triggers, assumptions about the processes, operational definitions of the key terms and gets everyone on the same. What is the purpose of SIPOC? The purpose of SIPOC is to define and document suppliers, inputs, key process steps, outputs and customers. From where to start the SIPOC? From supplier, input, process, output, customer? No, not at all. we have to start from the process. This is the typical flow of this SIPOC diagram. How we have to sequence it. First, write down the processes and sub-processes one by one vertically. Now, for each process or sub-process, write down the outputs. Outputs might be positive or negative. Positive means output of the process, that is the product or service. Negative output means scrap generated, waste generated, etc. Now, for each output, write down the customers. There should be customer for each positive or negative aspect. If there is no customer available for either positive or negative aspect, this is the opportunity where we can improve. Now note it down on the separate page. For each customer and for each process, now write down the inputs one by one. For each input, write down the suppliers available, the service providers available. It might include for each input there might be 2 or more suppliers. So write all the suppliers and alternative suppliers for each input, so that this will give clear-cut idea about this process, including suppliers to customers. This is the typical SIPOC diagram for shipment case. This is shipment is one of the process we have considered here. We have to write the sub processes under shipment. For example, preparation of list items to be dispatched with the specification, stock availability, preparation of database, customer items dispatch, preparation of packaging plan, QC report, packaging as per the packaging plan, etc. Now, for each process, you have to identify the output. For example, preparation of list of items to be dispatched. The output is database for the customer with machinery and space bags. For this output, customer is store. For this process, the input is BOM, that is bill of material and technical specification. Now, from where this input will be available, write down the suppliers. Here, the suppliers are research and development department or design or development department and the customer. Similarly, preparation of database customer item dispatch, there is output database packaging list, which will be the output for the customer. The customer is dispatched, whereas the inputs for this are the customer demands and shipment agency database. From where this input will be available for this particular action? Marketing department. Here we have drawn this SIPOC based on the actual observations of the process. There might be different suppliers for different inputs. Now, what is the opportunity of drawing this SIPOC? SIPOC works on y is equal to f of x function. x1, x2 are the sub inputs, the critical inputs which are leading to output. This might be positive or negative, which gives the potential opportunities for the improvement. For each output, positive or negative, we have to identify the customers or initiate the steps to reduce or eliminate the negative output. For example, in thermal power station, after burning of the coal, positive output is energy or electricity, whereas negative output is ash. Now for positive aspect, that is electricity, there are customers. Are there any customer? For negative aspect, that is for the ash, we have to identify. Or there is opportunity for bricks making, we can use this ash. So we have to identify the customers for this negative aspect. This is one of the opportunity can be identified through SIPOC. Each step is a key to the source of project. Multiplies the project can be explored from this. Thank you.